whirr of a spin dryer, the soft hiss of a gas poker warming the coals, the clink of teacups, and the distant voice of the wireless humming through a wool-curtained lounge. If any of that sends a shiver down your spine, you already know we're not just talking about gadgets. We're talking about a way of life. Because in the 1960s Britain, home wasn't home without these clever little machines. They didn't just help, they held memories. Tea in bed, mum at the mixer, dad carving the Sunday roast with surgical precision. These were the sounds and sights of a simpler, warmer time. So stick around, because by the end, you might just rediscover something that made your house a home. There was a time when waking up didn't mean scrolling a screen. It meant the gentle puff of steam and the smell of freshly brewed tea rising from your bedside table. The Goblin Teasmade was the unsung hero of the British bedroom in the 60s, part alarm clock, part kettle, and entirely magical to anyone under the age of 10. Invented decades earlier, but reaching its peak in post-war Britain, the Teasmade answered a national craving for comfort and automation. With a timer set the night before and 2 cups placed under the spout, it would click to life just before sunrise, filling the room with the warm scent of tea, just as the alarm buzzed into being. You didn't even have to get out from under the covers. A sleepy hand reached over, turned the dial, and, just like that, morning began. It wasn't just about convenience, it was a ritual, a quiet act of care, often prepared by one spouse for the other. For many, it meant mum had already thought of you, hours before she even stirred. The machine itself was boxy and beige, with glowing orange lights and chrome fittings. It looked like something out of a Dan Dare comic, but to those who used it, it was futuristic luxury, a slice of domestic science fiction. Eventually, the Teasmade faded. Central heating, coffee culture, and changing routines all played their part. But for a generation, those sleepy mornings, half dreaming and half sipping, remain one of the most comforting memories of all. Maybe you still have one tucked away in the loft, or maybe, just maybe, the smell of tea in the morning still brings back the soft creak of your childhood bedroom floorboards. Did your family have a Teasmade, or was it just a dream appliance you saw in catalogs? Before sleek front loaders and smart laundry cycles, there was the twin tub. Clunky, commanding, and utterly essential. If you grew up in a British home in the 1960s, you'll remember it not just as a machine, but as a weekly event. Made popular by brands like Hotpoint and Hoover, the twin tub was a triumph of its time. One tub for washing, one for spinning, connected by pipes and buckets and plenty of noise. It wasn't automatic, not by any stretch. You had to manually transfer the clothes from one side to the other using a plastic paddle or your bare hands, often while water sloshed onto the lino floor. And oh, the sound, that thunderous rhythmic chug of the spinner rattling the walls, the soap-slick swish of suds churning in the wash tub, and always that distinctive damp laundry smell mixed with the faint ozone scent of warm electrics. It was Mum's domain. Washing day was her marathon, and the twin tub was both her challenge and her champion. There was pride in it, getting school shirts bright white, wringing towels just right. Kids were warned not to touch the machine while it was on. It looked like it might take off, and it took up space. It took time, but it also brought a sense of progress, a glimpse at a post-war world that promised more ease, more time, more control over daily life. And for many families, it was the first real break from the old copper boiler or hand-wringing with a mangle. By the 80s, the twin tub was mostly gone, traded in for quieter, sleeker options. But for those who remember, its sound was part of the week's rhythm. Monday meant laundry, and laundry meant the twin tub. You didn't just hear it, you lived around it. Step into any living room in 1960s Britain, and your eyes would be drawn to one thing. Not the telly, not the fireplace, but the radiogram, a proud piece of furniture, long and low, finished in polished wood, and often perched beneath a mirror or family portrait. It wasn't just a music player, it was the heart of the room. Combining radio and record player in one luxurious cabinet, the radiogram was a symbol of status and style. Its doors opened like a treasure chest, revealing a turntable on one side, dials and glowing frequencies on the other. Names like Bush, Dansette, and Pi promised reliability and a touch of glamour. On Sunday mornings, it would hum with the light program. On Friday nights, it might be spinning The Shadows or a crackling Beatles single. The sound wasn't crystal clear. It was warm, woolly, with the occasional pop or hiss of well-loved vinyl. But that was part of its charm. You could feel the music fill the room like fog, softening the edges of everything. Dads would carefully lower the needle like surgeons, while kids danced on the rug. Mums might hum along as they dusted. The radiogram turned sound into ceremony. And then came change. Smaller record players, then cassettes, then CDs. The radiogram became a relic, too large to move, too sentimental to bin. Many ended up in garages or given away during house clearouts, seen as impractical, outdated, forgotten. But for those who lived with one, it never was just a gadget. It was the centerpiece of parties, quiet evenings, and rainy days. If you close your eyes, maybe you can still hear that low, warm hum before the music began. In the kitchen, nestled between the flour tin and the wooden spoon jar, stood a machine that looked part spaceship, part sculptural art, the Kenwood Chef. If the radiogram ruled the lounge, this was the undisputed king of the countertop. First introduced in the 1950s, but reaching icon status in the 60s, the Kenwood Chef wasn't just another appliance. It was a declaration of modernity, of middle-class aspiration, of the belief that convenience could be elegant. With its cream-colored curves, chrome arms, and interchangeable attachments, it offered a quiet promise. Homemade didn't have to mean hard work. You'd hear its motor rumble through the house on a Sunday, mixing up Victoria sponge batter or kneading dough for Chelsea buns. There was a certain smell that came with it, sugar and margarine, blended and slightly warm from the machine's gentle hum. Kids were tasked with licking the beaters clean. It was a rite of passage. Mums loved it, but so did dads, especially the sort who took over the kitchen once a week to make something proper. It wasn't just about function, it was about pride. A Kenwood on the counter meant you'd arrived, and yet, over time, it faded, replaced by sleeker, trendier gadgets, put away when space grew tight or when baking became less frequent. But in so many lofts, one still sits, quietly waiting, a dust-covered sentinel of a time when cake wasn't bought, it was made, from scratch, with care. Maybe your nan still has hers, maybe it still works, maybe, in that hum, you'd hear not just the sound of mixing, but the sound of home. Before the luxury of central heating, warmth came in rectangles, glowing, humming, ever so slightly dangerous rectangles. The electric bar fire wasn't just a heater, it was a ritual, a focal point, a glowing invitation to gather close. Usually set beneath the telly or nestled inside a tiled hearth, these fires came in beige or brown metal casings with 2 or 3 red bars. 1 click gave you glow, 2 gave you heat, 3, that was indulgence. You'd hear the faint buzz as it came to life, the soft pop of expanding metal, and then that unmistakable smell, burnt dust, slightly singed air, the scent of winter comfort. The dog would curl up in front of it, stretched out like a rug. Kids would hold their hands just close enough to sting. Parents would warn, "Don't touch it, it'll mark you for life," and they were right. Those coiled bars were unforgiving, but still, it was loved. It was there when you came in from the cold, cheeks red from the wind. It warmed damp school uniforms, steamed socks, and thawed fingers. It made the whole room feel like it had a pulse. Eventually, the electric bar fire disappeared, pushed out by radiators and thermostats, replaced by faux flames and silent warmth. But what we gained in efficiency, we lost in presence. Because it wasn't just about heat, it was about huddling, about knowing that once that fire flicked on, you were safe inside, dry, home. If the twin tub was the workhorse, the spin dryer was the whirlwind. Small, squat, and loud enough to wake the neighbors. It sat in the corner of countless 60s kitchens, a gleaming cylinder with a simple job: to take your dripping wet clothes and fling the water right out of them. Unlike today's gentle cycles, this thing had force. You'd lift the heavy lid, lower in the clothes with care, and press the switch. Then came the roar, a deafening, unbalanced, thunderous spin. You could feel it through your shoes, you could hear it from the garden, and when it stopped, there was always that moment of suspense before opening it to see if your knickers had survived the ride. Water drained out the side via a little hose into the sink, or sometimes just into a waiting bucket. No plumbing, no pretense, just raw mechanical muscle doing its best. And yet, for all its chaos, the spin dryer changed lives. It meant no more hours wringing wet laundry over the sink, no more clothes dripping on radiators for days. It gave mothers back time. It gave families the confidence to wash on rainy days without worrying about the garden line. They weren't sleek, they weren't safe, but they were solid, dependable, part of the fabric of the home. By the 80s, spin dryers became unnecessary, built into modern washing machines or forgotten entirely. But if you grew up hearing that engine roar on a Monday afternoon, it's a sound you'll never forget. Because that wasn't just washing day, that was life in motion. There was a distinct click, a firm, mechanical sound that told you the lights were on. Not a gentle tap, not a soft touch, but a solid clack. You felt it through your fingertips. That was the Bakelite switch, cold in the morning, faintly warm by evening, always dependable. These switches were mounted proud on the wall, often surrounded by peeling wallpaper or framed with a little smudge where hands had brushed past for years. They came in brown, ivory, or black, and they aged like old toffee, slightly brittle, quietly beautiful. Bakelite, one of the first plastics, was a miracle material back then. It didn't just make light switches, it made radios, telephones, plug sockets, even toothbrushes. But the light switch was where it lived longest. Clicked every day without fanfare. Kids used to flick them back and forth just for the sound. Dads would shout from down the hallway, "Oi, stop playing with the lights!" But you couldn't help it. That clunk was satisfying, reassuring. It wasn't just a utility, it was part of the house's rhythm. The last thing you touched at night, the first thing in the dark of early mornings. Eventually, they were replaced. Modern switches, flat and plastic, silent and unmemorable. But those old Bakelite ones still haunt the walls of some houses. Quiet relics, still ticking in hallways or bedrooms barely changed since the 60s. If you ever find one, go on, press it. Feel the weight of the past in your fingers. You're not just turning on the light, you're turning on a memory. Before cassettes took over, and long before digital took it all away, there was a marvel of home audio engineering, the reel-to-reel tape recorder. 2 open spools, a path of brown magnetic tape, and a machine that looked like it might have come from a Cold War bunker. It was big, it was fiddly, it was usually Dad's pride and joy, handled with the kind of reverence normally reserved for crown jewels or the car's MOT. You'd hear it start with a whirr, then the gentle tick-tick-tick as the reels turned. Voices, songs, radio plays, all captured and replayed with that slight flutter of pitch that told you this was real. Not perfect, not pristine, but full of life. Kids would record themselves singing or reading aloud. Mums might use it to play back the news while ironing. Dads recorded radio dramas, Top of the Pops, or, if they were especially keen, soundscapes of garden birds or passing trains. Each tape became a time capsule. There was something tactile about it all. The threading of the tape through metal arms, the pressing of chunky buttons marked play, stop, rewind, and the smell, plasticky, faintly oily, with a hint of heated circuitry. By the late 70s, it was all fading. Cassettes made recording easier, Walkmans made listening personal, and the reel-to-reel became too bulky, too complicated, too analog. But if you ever stumble upon one in the attic, dusty and silent, try plugging it in. If it still works, you might just hear voices from 50 years ago, singing, laughing, living, and in that moment, it's not just tape, it's time, rewound. You could always tell it was Sunday, the smell of roast beef drifting through the house, the clatter of pans in the kitchen, and then that sound, a sharp, buzzing whine, unmistakable and almost theatrical. The electric carving knife had been summoned. Sleek, silver, and just a little bit terrifying, this was the gadget that made Dad feel like a surgeon. With a long handle and two serrated blades that moved in unison, it sliced through meat with a kind of industrial grace. The first time you saw it in action, it was like a magic trick. Effortless cuts, perfect portions. It didn't come out every day. No, this was reserved for occasions. Sundays, Christmas, a visit from the in-laws. It was stored high in a cupboard, its coiled cord always slightly tangled, the blades packed away in a cardboard sheath or hard plastic case. And there was a sound that came with it, not just the buzz, but the silence that followed. Everyone would stop and watch. The ritual had begun. One slow, steady movement through the roast, the turkey, the ham, each slice laid carefully onto the platter, the gravy bubbling nearby. There was something dignified about it, even a little ceremonial. It turned dinner into an event, and when the blades finally clicked off and the carving board was cleared, the room came back to life. Plates passed, glasses clinked, chatter resumed. Over time it fell out of fashion. Carving became quieter, simpler, but for many, the sound of that knife still lingers, part of the Sunday rhythm, like songs of praise or the smell of mint sauce. And maybe, just maybe, you still hear that buzz in your mind when the meat hits the table. What was your Sunday roast ritual like? And did your dad wield the electric carving knife? Toast, in the 60s, wasn't just breakfast. It was a performance. The pop of the toaster, the rising steam from the bread, and, most importantly, the ritual of the toast rack. Everyone had one. Usually metal, sometimes ceramic, shaped like a tiny jail for hot slices. It sat at the center of the table, each piece standing upright like warm soldiers waiting for butter and jam. And yes, it made the toast go cold faster, but that wasn't the point. The rack was part of the choreography. The electric toaster itself was a marvel. Often chrome, often glowing orange when in use, it was still something of a novelty. 2 slots, a spring-loaded mechanism, and a lever that promised a satisfying pop, a noise that echoed through kitchens alongside the clink of teacups and the murmur of morning news. Kids would watch it like a game, waiting for the launch. Would it fly high? Would it burn? Would it land on the floor? No breakfast was ever quite the same. Mums would stand at the counter, butter spreading in soft yellow lines, while dads read the paper and flipped to the football results. It was a quiet symphony of routine. Toast in the rack, jam nearby, maybe a boiled egg in a novelty holder. Eventually the toast rack faded. It was deemed fussy, unnecessary. Toasters became faster, sleeker, more impatient, but that little rack, cooling toast just a bit too quickly, spoke to a different pace of life. And if you've still got one tucked in a cupboard somewhere, dig it out. Put the slices in, sit down, and take your time, because toast, like memory, is best when it's shared. If the Kenwood Chef was the kitchen's heavyweight, the Sunbeam Mixmaster was its nimble little cousin. Quicker, lighter, and just as beloved. With its shiny chrome body and twin beaters, it looked like something from a 1950s sci-fi film, and often sounded like it too. This was the mixer you could lift with one hand, plug in with a satisfying click, and use in any bowl you had lying about. The beaters snapped in with a clunk, and with the turn of a dial, they'd come alive, whirring and clinking against the sides of glass bowls like wind chimes in a thunderstorm. And then came the smell, sweet, warm, familiar, butter creamed with sugar, egg yolks folded in with care, the kitchen filled with the sound of metal on porcelain and the scent of a Victoria sponge halfway to heaven. Mums swore by it, nans passed them down. The Mixmaster was reliable, even if a little noisy. It didn't have 30 attachments or a dough hook the size of your fist, but it did the job, and it did it beautifully. Sometimes it wasn't even switched off before the beaters were yanked out and handed to kids, who licked them clean like ice lollies. You didn't need a timer. You knew the mixture was ready by the change in pitch, that deepened purr that said, "You're nearly there." Eventually, it was overtaken by fancier gadgets with digital screens and brand new names. But if you open a cupboard in your mum's house, or your nan's, you might still find it there. Yellowed with age, but loyal. It didn't just mix ingredients, it mixed moments, and it made baking feel like something the whole family was part of. Before blow dryers became small enough to fit in your handbag, there was the mighty GEC hood, the home salon for every British mum chasing a good set for the weekend. A dome-shaped wonder connected by a thick plastic hose to a humming bass unit. It looked like something out of Thunderbirds, and for a generation of women, it was just as exciting. You'd plug it in, adjust the cap over your curlers, and sit back in a kitchen chair with a Woman's Own or the Radio Times on your lap. The gentle hum would begin. Warm air, not too hot, began to fill the hood, puffing it out like a jellyfish as it dried your perm into place. It wasn't fast, but it was effective, and it turned hair drying into a ritual, one that meant peace, stillness, and a touch of glamour. Kids would giggle at the sight of it. Dads would steer clear. But for Mum, it was her time, her space. And oh, the smell. The mingling of setting lotion, hot plastic, and faint perfume. You could tell hair was being done from 3 rooms away. It meant something important was coming. An anniversary, a night at the social club, a visit from relatives. As salon visits became more common and modern dryers more compact, the GEC hood quietly retired. Some ended up in lofts, others were sold at boot fairs, dusty but still humming if given the chance. But for the women who used it, the sound of that hum wasn't just heat, it was hope, a moment of self-care in a life that didn't offer many. If you ever see one again, don't laugh. That plastic bonnet once made ordinary days feel just a little bit special. Before radiators quietly warmed every room, there was a more primal ritual, a fire to be lit, and a gas poker to do it. It looked almost medieval, a long metal rod, hollow, with a nozzle at one end and a blackened tip at the other. If you were lucky enough to have one in your home, then you remember that hiss, that tiny roar, that moment of magic. The gas poker was fed from the wall, usually beside the fireplace. You'd strike a match, open the tap, and wait for the soft whoosh of blue flame as it came to life. Then, you'd press it deep into the coal or wood pile, the flame licking at black lumps until they began to crackle and glow. There was skill to it, a rhythm. Too long and you'd scorch the grate. Too short and the fire wouldn't take. Parents did it with practiced hands. Kids watched from the hearthrug, mesmerized by the transformation, from dead stillness to living heat. And there was always the smell, the slightly sulfurous tang of gas, the first puff of smoke as coal caught, the dry warmth that began to creep into the room. It didn't just heat the house, it warmed the bones. Eventually, the gas poker was phased out. Safety concerns, cleaner fuels, and modern heating systems made it obsolete. But it lingered in cupboards and sheds, rusting slowly, remembered fondly. It wasn't just a tool, it was the opening act of winter evenings, the spark that turned a cold room into the heart of the home. If you remember the hiss, you remember home. If you could bring back just one of these items, working and in perfect condition, which would it be? Hanging from the ceiling like a wooden skeleton in so many British kitchens, the pulley maid was part invention, part daily rhythm, also called the ceiling airer, or simply that thing Mum used to dry the socks on. It was as common as the kettle, especially in houses warmed by a single coal stove or aga, made of 4 or 6 wooden slats, strung with iron ends and hoisted up by ropes and pulleys. It hovered just above your head. Laundry would be pegged across it like colorful flags. Steam rising from damp shirts, tights stretched taut, tea towels lined up like a washing parade. You didn't really notice it as a kid. It was just there, part of the air, the heat, the smell, but you'd duck under it as you came into the kitchen, brushing against warm flannel or a dripping sock. It added its own scent to the room, a comforting mix of laundry powder, damp cotton, and warmth from the cooker. And it worked. It dried clothes even in the dead of winter, when the garden line was out of action and the radiators were no help at all. It turned the kitchen into a drying room, a haven of practical beauty. For mothers, it was a lifeline. For kids, a place to play beneath. For everyone, a sign that life was ticking along as it should. Eventually, they disappeared from new builds, replaced by tumble dryers and chrome radiators. But even now, in old homes or lovingly restored cottages, you'll find them still hanging, quietly doing their job, just as they did 50 years ago. They didn't just dry clothes. They dried memories into the air. There was a time when watching telly wasn't just a habit. It was an event, and at the center of it all stood a television that didn't speak unless you got up and told it to. No remote, no voice control, just a chunky set of square buttons that made a clunk when pressed, and a screen that took its sweet time to warm up. British families of the 1960s might have had one channel, maybe two if you were lucky, and the aerial was pointed just right. But that didn't matter, because the television was sacred. It sat in pride of place, often in a wood laminated case with short, stubby legs. You didn't just glance at it, you gathered around it. Those buttons, usually 5 or 6 in a row, were physical, solid. You had to press them with intent, and each one changed the world inside your living room. Sometimes the picture would roll, sometimes it would buzz, sometimes you'd need to give the set a sharp knock on the side to stop the screen from going sideways. The glow, as it powered up, was almost cinematic. First, darkness, then a small dot, then the slow expansion of grey static until a face emerged from the fog. David Attenborough, maybe, or Del Boy, or the test card girl with the clown. Families watched together, knees touching, slippers on. TV dinners balanced on trays, the room lit only by that bluish light and the flicker of something shared. Eventually, of course, the push buttons gave way to remote controls, flat screens, and endless channels. But the magic changed too, because back then, watching telly wasn't something you did while scrolling. It was something you did together, and you didn't just watch it. You waited for it. You earned it. Do you still own any of these gadgets, or have they all vanished from your home? If any part of this journey stirred something in you, if a sound, a smell, or a small, forgotten button brought your childhood rushing back, then this is your place. Share your memories in the comments. Tell us which gadget lived in your home, and don't forget to subscribe so we can keep these memories alive. One hum, one clunk, one warm cup of tea at a time.